دولتكم وأنا سعيد بأن
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm delighted to.
What stands out when you think of Saudi Arabia? Is it the vast oil reserves, its religious significance, or its other valuable resources? Beyond these known factors, Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam, but many are unaware of the fierce battles the ruling family fought to gain and hold onto power. In this video, we'll explore the rise and fall of the House of Saud, what has helped them stay at the top, and the threats looming over their rule. When we talk of Saudi Arabia, many people only know that the country hosts thousands of Muslim faithfuls from all over the world for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. Most people don't know and have never bothered to learn the kingdom's history. The story of the House of Saud began in the 18th century in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula. At the time, the region was just what could pass for a patchwork of tribal territories with no definite or central authority. Among all these tribes, however, was the Al Saud family, which was led by no other person than Mohammed bin Saud. He established a small domain in Diriyah in 1772, and it became the genesis of what we now know as Saudi Arabia. Mohammed bin Saud was a visionary leader determined to consolidate power and build a lasting legacy. Truly, it was a huge feat, but Mohammed bin Saud didn't arrive there in a day. In 1744, a fateful alliance changed the trajectory of Arabian history. Mohammed bin Saud joined forces with Sheikh Mohammed ibn Abd al-Wahhab, a religious reformer advocating a return to the strict teachings of Islam then. Before that time, he had formed the Ibn Abd al-Wahhab's movement. It was also known as Wahhabism, which simply meant seeking to purify Islamic practices by getting rid of what is considered un-Islamic innovations, such as the veneration of saints and ornate tombs. For those who believed in it, this partnership was ideological and strategic. Mohammed bin Saud gained religious legitimacy, while Sheikh Mohammed ibn Abd al-Wahhab found a political protector to spread his reformist ideas. This alliance became the cornerstone of the Saudi state. As noted by journalists, the House of Saud became the sword arm of Wahhabism, cutting through the Arabian Peninsula with fire and steel in the name of religious purity. During the formative stage of the Saud-Wahhabi alliance, they staged many campaigns to expand their influence. By the late 18th century, their forces had brought much of Central Arabia under their control, including the holy cities of Mecca and Medina by 1806. This success established the first Saudi state and made the House of Saud a force to be reckoned with. However, their rapid rise did not go unnoticed. In ancient times, some kingdoms used to be very powerful to the point of not wanting a rival. In the case of House Saudi, their contender was the Ottoman Empire. The moment the empire, which had until then claimed authority over the Islamic world, saw the Saud Wahhabi movement, it felt like a blow to them. Seeing how much and powerful they were growing, the Ottoman Empire burned with rage. They connived to suppress this growing power. What did they do, and what was the result? The Ottomans dispatched an army led by Muhammad Ali Pasha, the governor of Egypt, in 1811. The Ottoman campaign was so brutal and decisive that by 1818, the Saud Wahhabi forces were defeated, and Diriyah, the family's stronghold, was destroyed. The war didn't end there. Many members of the Al Saud family were captured or executed, and the first Saudi state came to an end. Without gainsaying, this era caused a huge setback for the House of Saud. Nonetheless, their story was far from over. Despite their defeat, the strength of their Wahhabi alliance allowed them to build and rise again, but it wasn't a cakewalk. How did Saudi Arabia become unified over the years to be what it is today? Keep watching as more details unfold. The unification of Saudi Arabia. Many historians would argue that Saudi Arabia would never be what it is today if not for a man called Abdulaziz ibn Saud. He was a charismatic leader whose vision, determination, and ability to deal with the complexities of tribal politics led to the creation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932. Abdulaziz was born in 1875. Unlike other people born into wealth and luxury, Abdulaziz ibn Saud came into the world when his Al Saud family had lost power and been exiled from Riyadh by the rival Al Rashid clan. This period of exile increased his resolve to reclaim his family's throne. In January 1902, when he clocked 26, Abdulaziz launched a daring mission to retake Riyadh with just 60 followers. The capture of the Masmak fortress was the beginning of his campaign to unify the Arabian Peninsula. As described by historian David Commons in The Wahhabi Mission and Saudi Arabia, this victory was not merely a military triumph, but a symbolic reclamation of the Saud family's ancestral heartland. Abdulaziz's leadership style was a mixture of military brilliance and diplomatic finesse. He was not only a skilled tactician on the battlefield, he also knew how to negotiate with the devil himself. His ability to inspire loyalty and build alliances was instrumental in his rise to power. Abdulaziz led many military campaigns to attract control over the Arabian Peninsula. In all of this, the key to his success was the Ikhwan, a tribal militia loyal to Wahhabi Islam. The Ikhwan played a central role in defeating rival tribes and expanded Saudi influence across Central Arabia. However, as the Ikhwan grew more powerful, they challenged Abdulaziz's authority by demanding further expansion that conflicted with his strategic goals. The rift peaked in the Battle of Sabila in 1929, where Abdulaziz decisively crushed the Ikhwan rebellion. This victory strengthened his control over the region and demonstrated his ability to balance the demands of his military allies with the need for centralized authority. The New York Times even reported on the aftermath of the battle, in which he described Abdulaziz as a ruler who understood when to wield the sword and when to offer the olive branch. The formation of modern Saudi Arabia and oil discovery. The war was fruitful, so by 1931, Abdulaziz had brought the regions of Najd, Hejaz, and Al-Asa under his control. On the 23rd of September, 1931, he proclaimed the formation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with himself as king. This unification ended the 3 decades of struggle and positioned Saudi Arabia as a key player in the Middle East. The unification was not just a political achievement, but also a cultural feat. Abdulaziz worked to incorporate the diverse tribes and communities within the kingdom to promote Wahhabi Islam as the unifying ideology. In the long run, his vision extended beyond military and political dominance to create a shared identity for the new nation. In 1938, just 6 years after unification, Saudi Arabia experienced a game-changing moment. American geologists working for the California Arabian Standard Oil Company, known as CASOC, later known as Aramco, discovered oil in the Dammam Dome near Dhahran. This discovery later transformed Saudi Arabia from a relatively isolated desert kingdom into a global economic powerhouse. The discovery of oil brought unexpected wealth and modernization. With this development, roads, schools, and hospitals were built, and the kingdom began to develop its infrastructure. The newfound oil wealth also elevated Saudi Arabia's geopolitical importance in a way no one had thought. This made it a key player in global energy markets. As Time magazine wrote in a 1944 article, Saudi Arabia's oil reserves are not just a treasure for the kingdom, they are a resource that will shape the world's economy for generations to come. However, the question is, how did all these benefit Saudi Arabia? The rise of Saudi Arabia as an oil superpower. After the discovery of oil in 1938, Saudi Arabia entered a new era of huge economic growth. By 1949, Saudi Arabia had become one of the world's largest oil producers, with vast reserves that fueled the global economy for decades. Robert Lacey in The Kingdom described the transformation as the greatest windfall of the modern age. He also quipped that the kingdom's newfound wealth allowed Saudi Arabia to modernize rapidly. As oil production expanded, so did the kingdom's influence in international affairs. By the 1950s and 1960s, Saudi Arabia's oil exports were very important to global markets, especially in Europe and the United States, which relied on the kingdom's oil for their energy needs. This vast revenue from oil exports enabled Saudi Arabia to attract significant political and economic influence. While Saudi Arabia had become an important player in the oil sector, the relationship between the Saudi monarchy and Aramco was mutually beneficial. While the United States firms brought technical expertise and capital, Saudi Arabia reaped the rewards of their impressive oil reserves. However, foreign companies controlled Aramco, a point of contention for the Saudi government. With that kind of control, it wouldn't be long before they lost hold of their natural resources. They knew this, so they sought to regain more authority. In 1973, the Saudi government made a gigantic move to assert control over its oil wealth by purchasing a majority stake in Aramco. This was a significant step toward nationalizing the country's oil industry and increasing its autonomy. The shift in ownership also served as the beginning of a more assertive Saudi foreign policy. As the New York Times reported at the time, this was a turning point in Saudi Arabia's oil sovereignty, as the kingdom sought to ensure that its resources were used for its benefit. The fall of Saudi Arabia. When the fall of Saudi Arabia is discussed, it doesn't mean the complete collapse of the oil-rich nation. On the contrary, it refers to the challenges and setbacks the House of Saud and the kingdom have faced over the years. In case you didn't know, these challenges threatened their stability, legitimacy, and dominance in the Middle East and the world. Let's look at some factors contributing to Saudi Arabia's decline. One of the first blows that almost knocked the nation to her feet was over-reliance on oil and economic vulnerabilities. How did these negatively affect Saudi Arabia? You may want to ask. Don't forget Saudi Arabia's rise to global prominence is closely tied to its massive oil reserves. However, this heavy reliance on oil has exposed the country to significant economic vulnerabilities. Fluctuating oil prices, which caused a global shift toward renewable energy, and challenges in economic diversification have all created serious concerns for the kingdom's long-term stability. Once the kingdom discovered oil, its economy became heavily dependent on oil. For example, the global oil price crash of 2014 to 2015 saw prices crash from over $100 per barrel to below $30. As reported by the Financial Times, Saudi Arabia faced economic strain, which led to budget deficits exceeding $98 billion in 2015 alone. To manage the crisis, the government implemented austere measures that included cutting subsidies for fuel and utilities. Another factor was a global shift from fossil fuels. After a while, the world seemed to recover from the petroleum fever and tilted toward renewable energy sources and carbon-neutral policies. Countries across the globe started committing to reducing their reliance on fossil fuels to combat climate change. For instance, the European Union's Green Deal and China's pledge to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060 began to reshape energy markets. According to Bloomberg, these shifts were projected to reduce long-term oil demand, and guess what? These policies directly impacted Saudi Arabia's primary revenue source. When Saudi Arabia saw the impact of these challenges on the economy, it decided to respond by introducing Vision 2030, an ambitious reform program spearheaded by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The plan aims to reduce the country's dependence on oil by diversifying its economy and investing in tourism, technology, and entertainment sectors. However, the initiative also faced substantial hurdles. One of the main challenges was attracting foreign investment. Despite high-profile projects like Neom, a $500 billion futuristic city, the kingdom struggled to convince investors due to concerns about political stability, human rights issues, and the pace of reforms. The Wall Street Journal noted in 2021 that international skepticism over Saudi Arabia's ability to deliver on these grand promises had limited foreign interest. In addition, some projects under Vision 2030 have been criticized as overly ambitious or unrealistic. For example, Neom has been plagued by delays, controversies, and skepticism about its feasibility. Meanwhile, domestic opposition to rapid modernization has created further complications and limitations. What was the extent of the damage caused? Keep watching for answers to your questions. Political scandals and loss of credibility. Apart from their over-reliance on oil and its non-sustenance, Saudi Arabia's political scandals and allegations of human rights violations affected its global reputation and strained relationships with key allies. Two major cases stood out in this matter. These were the assassination of journalist Jamal Khashoggi and the kingdom's track record on human rights. On the 2nd of October, 2018, a journalist named Jamal Khashoggi was murdered in Saudi Arabia. This shocked the world and almost damaged Saudi Arabia's international standing beyond repair. How important was this man, and why did his demise shock the world? Khashoggi was a columnist for The Washington Post who entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to obtain documents for his upcoming marriage, but never came out. In the end, Turkish authorities revealed he was murdered and dismembered inside the consulate. After further investigation, the Saudi hit squad was found guilty. The incident caused a global outcry, with major media outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian launching extensive investigations into the case. A United Nations report by Special Rapporteur Agnes Callamard stated there was credible evidence linking Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, also called MBS, to the crime. However, as anyone could expect, the Saudi government denied any direct involvement by MBS. In response, many Western leaders expressed outrage. United States President Joe Biden, during his campaign, pledged to make Saudi Arabia a pariah for its role in the murder. The repercussions were not limited to a few nations. Major corporations and figures pulled out of Saudi-hosted events like the Future Investment Initiative, tagged Davos in the desert. A piece in The Washington Post called the murder a crime of the century and questioned the credibility of the kingdom's reform narrative under MBS. Despite Saudi Arabia's attempts to rehabilitate its image, the Khashoggi murder remains a significant blot on its record. In 2019, The New York Times reported on a wave of crackdowns that targeted intellectuals and reformists, undermining the government's claims of progressive change under Vision 2030. Social media platforms even amplified the global sensation, with hashtags like #FreeLujain and #Khashoggi trending worldwide and sparking activism against Saudi policies. These human rights abuses strained Saudi Arabia's relationships with Western allies, especially in Europe and North America. Governments and organizations have also questioned arms deals and trade agreements with the kingdom. For example, Germany temporarily placed a ban on arms exports to Saudi Arabia after the Khashoggi murder. Meanwhile, public protests in the United States, United Kingdom, and Canada have kept the spotlight on the kingdom's abuses. Regional rivalries and geopolitical instability. Many rival countries have often tested Saudi Arabia's power. They simply want to see how much they can tolerate and how much fight they have in them. For a country prone to war, these rivalries and conflicts have drained resources, created divisions, and attracted global criticism. Some of the issues include proxy wars, the never-ending rivalry with Iran, and the Qatar blockade. In modern times, one of the most controversial aspects of Saudi Arabia's foreign policy is its involvement in proxy wars, particularly in Yemen. Since 2015, Saudi Arabia has led a military coalition against the Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. The war, which at first was aimed at restoring the internationally recognized Yemeni government, eventually devolved into a humanitarian catastrophe. The United Nations then described the Yemen crisis as the world's worst humanitarian disaster. Millions of Yemenis faced famine, displacement, and disease. According to The Guardian, over 377,000 deaths were reported by the end of 2021. Saudi airstrikes, which are often accused of targeting civilian areas, have drawn harsh criticism from human rights organizations and Western governments. Amnesty International has even documented repeated violations of international humanitarian law by the coalition, further tarnishing Saudi Arabia's global image. Needless to say, the war has also drained Saudi resources. When you spend billions annually on military operations, money that could have gone into more productive ventures, you will be broke at some point. The Saudi-led blockade of Qatar was another episode that showed regional tensions and the fragility of Gulf unity. In June 2017, Saudi Arabia, along with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, imposed a blockade on Qatar. They accused it of supporting terrorism and fostering close ties with Iran. Qatar denied the allegations and used its wealth to weather the blockade, eventually turning to Turkey and Iran for support. The blockade fractured the Gulf Cooperation Council, also called GCC, an alliance to promote regional cooperation and stability. As Al Jazeera noted, the GCC divisions weakened Saudi Arabia's influence and raised questions about its leadership in the region. Critics argued that the blockade achieved little beyond creating unnecessary divisions among Gulf states. In January 2021, the blockade was lifted with the signing of the Al-Ula Declaration. It all signaled a reconciliation between Qatar and its neighbors. However, the episode left lingering mistrust. Also, Saudi Arabia is currently facing mounting social and demographic challenges. How come? Its young and increasingly vocal population demands reforms that align with the rapidly changing world. They keep complaining about issues such as youth unemployment and gender inequality. With over 50% of Saudi Arabia's population under the age of 30, creating jobs and economic opportunities for young people has become one of the kingdom's most pressing concerns. According to a 2023 report by the World Bank, Saudi youth unemployment stands at around 30%. That statistic is too much for a government that won't stop proclaiming its ambitious Vision 2030 plan to diversify the economy, as many young Saudis struggle to find meaningful employment outside the oil sector. High unemployment among the youth can have far-reaching consequences, including social unrest and diminished trust in leadership. A Bloomberg report in 2022 talked about the lack of opportunities for young people, which increased discontent in urban centers, with some turning to social media to voice their frustrations. Women's rights and gender inequality. While Saudi Arabia has made strides in granting women more freedoms, such as the right to drive in 2018 and access to the workforce, the progress in the kingdom remains pretty slow and uneven. Today, women still face huge legal and societal restrictions, including guardianship laws that limit their autonomy. A 2021 British Broadcasting Corporation news analysis noted that Saudi women, despite reforms, remain underrepresented in politics and leadership positions. Activists like Lujain al-Hatlul, who campaigned for women's driving rights, have been detained and, in some cases, tortured. This showed the government's dual approach of reform and repression. In this regard, though, the international community has been vocal in its criticism, with organizations like Amnesty International urging Saudi Arabia to address gender inequality comprehensively. Loss of traditional support and religion extremism. We cannot mention Saudi Arabia's fall without touching on its loss of traditional support. The House of Saud has traditionally relied on the support of key tribal leaders and the religious clergy to maintain its grip on power. However, MBS's reforms and centralization of authority have sidelined these groups, weakening the kingdom's internal cohesion. For instance, some tribal leaders have expressed discontent with the government's land acquisition policies for mega projects like Neom, a futuristic city built under Vision 2030. The Guardian reported in 2021 that members of the Al-Huwaitat tribe were forcibly evicted from their ancestral lands, which then led to protests and criticism from human rights groups. Similarly, the clergy, which has long been a pillar of the monarch's legitimacy, has diminished its influence as MBS pushes social reforms that challenge traditional norms. This loss of support from key allies could leave the kingdom vulnerable to internal dissent, particularly during times of crisis. Just like the loss of traditional support, Saudi Arabia's religious identity has faced many problems in recent decades. The association of Wahhabism with extremism, coupled with opposition from Islamist groups within the kingdom, has eroded its standing both domestically and internationally. While Saudi Arabia has long relied on Wahhabism to legitimize its rule, dissenting clerics and radical Islamist groups within the kingdom have proven to be a pain in the neck of the kingdom. Militants have also targeted the kingdom by accusing it of being too closely aligned with the West. For instance, Al-Qaeda launched a series of attacks in Saudi Arabia around 2001 to 2003. One such tragic case was the 2003 Riyadh compound bombings that ended the lives of over 36 people. With all that has happened in Saudi Arabia over the years, what does it look like today? Saudi Arabia and House of Saud today. Saudi Arabia and the House of Saud still struggle with both internal and external problems today. For one, Saudi Arabia has made headlines for its social reforms, including expanded rights for women and easing restrictions on cultural and entertainment activities. For example, women can now drive, travel without male guardians, and participate in public life more actively than ever before. However, these reforms are overshadowed by the kingdom's human rights record. In 2024, Saudi Arabia carried out 330 executions, which happened to be the highest number in decades. As expected, this attracted criticism from human rights organizations and Western allies. According to Reuters, the surge in executions contradicts prior claims of reducing capital punishment, raising concerns about the kingdom's commitment to reform. Also, Saudi Arabia's role as a regional power remains crucial. In what many can describe as a big move, the kingdom welcomed a Syrian delegation in 2024, making it the first official visit since the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. This rapprochement shows Saudi Arabia's efforts to play a leading role in regional stability and reconstruction. The Financial Times noted, "The visit signals Saudi Arabia's willingness to engage diplomatically in post-conflict reconstruction efforts." Meanwhile, tensions with Iran continue to dominate the regional landscape. The rivalry has triggered proxy conflicts across the Middle East, from Yemen to Iraq, adding to Saudi Arabia's security and economic burdens. Globally, Saudi Arabia's relationship with the United States remains complex. While strategic ties, including arms deals and security cooperation, persist, issues like the Yemen war and human rights abuses have strained relations, particularly under the Biden administration. According to the Washington Post, the United States has taken a more critical stance, urging the kingdom to address humanitarian concerns. What do you think about Saudi Arabia and the House of Saud? Do you think the kingdom still lives in the past and needs to embrace modernization more? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. You can also watch the other videos on your screen.